Hi guys, so we only had about an hour limit on there, but we seem to have, for all good intent purposes, gone over the hour. So I'm hoping Grinder's still there to join me for the last few questions. So apologies for that, guys. I thought we'd be done the hour, but I do tend to talk quite a bit, and Grinder, with all positives, obviously likes to talk as well. So if you can just request to join us again, Grinder, and then we can just ask those last few questions, because I know you were mid-flow at the time. So if you can just hit that request button, and I'll get you joined into the live video here again. Um, and we're back.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, I was in mid flow, or like you said, I was in mid flow. So, the Sikh Empire period essentially had different ways of recruiting, and so therefore, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, like I said, had his different generals who were able to actually kind of go out and recruit. And in fact, it became so popular that of recruitment, it was like there was an abundance of people joining because the pay rates were pretty good as well. And I actually again detailed the pay rates within my book as well, in terms of how the pay rates increased as well during the time of the Sikh Empire as well. So I think money played a bigger part during the Sikh Empire period, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? And now that you mention it, I think we're so assuming that at the time of these battles, the Sikhs and those that were against, they were just big, massive fights. I guess almost like what you'd probably see in films. But now that you've broken it down in terms of the way it were, where there were groups of small individuals, I assume they therefore got bigger as they came together to fight the bigger cause. But also knowing that they were actually paid, that never even crossed my mind, because I thought they did it purely for principle and passion.
Well, it's slightly different in Ranjit Singh's time because he also had what we call a Jagirdar Fauj as well. So what that meant is, in terms of you actually having a land estate, you have to furnish 100 soldiers. You have to furnish 50 soldiers for his army. So that's
Mm.
the other thing that used to take place as well. So, and the land estate owner, the Jagirdars we call them, used to have to actually provide soldiers. And if they didn't, Ranjit Singh would take those lands back as well. So, it's there's different kind of things going on in terms of recruitment at that particular period in time.
Great. So we ask a few more questions around the books, The Rise of Sikh Soldier, before we do wrap up. So for those guys who just rejoined us or joined us, this is the second part of our interview with Grinder. I didn't know we were going to go to the second part of Grinder, but I think it was just a natural flow. So why not make the opportunity, or create the opportunity, and let's do it. So in this new book, you discuss again Hari Singh Nalwar, Akali Fulla Singh. What was the reason for their description of stories? What was the connection? Why was it so important to reference these fighters in your book?
I think what it is that we have what we call stories which are told about legendary warriors like Hari Singh Nalwar, Akali Fulla Singh. Just saying their names brings passion to one when they talk. However, there's a lot of myths associated with them as well, and I really wanted to get into the kind of details of the history of Akali Fulla Singh, in terms of him not just being a military warrior and head of the Buddha Dal at that time as well, but also a religious leader as well in Amritsar, in terms of what he could actually do as a spiritual leader. And it's really interesting because I found some British documents which actually show how the East India Company wanted to arrest Akali Fulla Singh when he attacked a British camp. And the key thing which comes out of this is that we know about the greatness of Akali Fulla Singh, but when you actually see it from the British sources that say, we want to capture this fugitive, this criminal, this robber, and not one person in the Punjab is willing to turn him over to the British, that's when you actually see what is actually what the myths and these history and legendary tales they talk about is so true. But it's really good to see it in black and white as well. So that's in relation to Akali Fulla Singh. in relation to Hari Singh Nalwa, again, a very legendary figure in the sense that he was able to stop the hordes of invaders of the Afghans coming in. Basically, under Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Hari Singh Nalwa closed off the border of invaders invading Punjab. I think that's the key thing we need to take a lesson from the Ranjit Singh period. So Hari Singh Nalwa had all these forts that he'd created. He created protection boundaries, the areas of Jamrud, and various other areas which he had under his command was so kind of, pivotal to the success of the Sikh Empire. Remember, these are all areas which are all Muslims or Muslim related areas. So he had to work with them. He also fought with them. He also had an iron grip as well, if you can call it that. But at the end of the day, he's considered to be one of the greatest leaders that the Sikhs have had. And so therefore, to write his story was very, very important as well.
Okay. Another question from Harry Tandy, and he may need to expand on this unless you're able to answer it. So, to yourself, Gurinder, could you talk about the two Holocausts you touched on earlier on, the big one, Mir Munnu, and the second one? So a bit of context for that.
Yeah, I mean, to go into them would take a long time, but what I can say is the following. What I can say is the following. The two Holocausts, individually, it was both surprise attacks by the Mughals in the particular, and then the Afghans as well. So the Chota Gulugara, again, Justice Singh Ahluwalia was there at that particular time as well. And, in the particular regions, he managed to get them to safety, but, it was still a massacre. The Vadda Gulugara is a bit more known about because of the fact that it happened with the Sikhs almost being surrounded, and the deaths, countless deaths of men, women, children. It was literally a brutal massacre. But the actual Khalsa at that time, so that's why we have the leadership of Justice Singh Ahluwalia and Charat Singh, where I've given descriptions of these particular battles. It shows that if these Sikh leaders did not actually even try and fight their way out of the clutches of death, that everyone would have been massacred, if that makes sense. So it's hard to go into too much detail, just on this on this interview here. But it suffice to say, these are so much crucial areas of our history. Everyone should read up more about. I've gone into the information in terms of what the Khalsa leaders did to protect everybody. And, I think what comes out of it is that these Gulugare or Holocausts should be in everyone's memories. And I don't think it is as much as it should be. I mean, I went to India a couple of months ago, as you're aware, and I visited the location of the Vadda Gulugara, which is Malay Kotla region. And so therefore, when I visited it, you could actually feel something there in the air in terms of what the land actually represented and the massacres. There's a Gurdwara there as well. And, when you go there, you actually feel that there's something happened in this region, if that makes sense. So it's definitely an area for people they've actually made a massive memorial there. People can describe it the way they want to. I think it could have been done in a better way, but that's just my historical head coming through in terms of the way the battle should have been portrayed in terms of memorial. But everyone should go and visit that Jaga because it's really, really important for our faith and for our history, and in order to take our children there as well. If you're never going to go, make sure your children definitely go and visit the locations of the Vadda and Chota Gurugaras.
Okay, brilliant. Harry, hopefully that answers your question. Again, guys, I've only got a few more questions. So if you want to get your question in as well, then, we've got a bit more time now. So please do jump in and, this is your opportunity to ask the Sikh God himself, Gurinder Mann, anything you want to know regarding the release of his new book and anything related to, Sikh history in terms of battle, soldiers, army, military, etc. Now, in terms of circa 1700 to 1900, the innovations that the European soldiers brought to the Sikh Empire during that period, how important was that? What was the impact? What was the benefits? Were there any drawbacks? Was there any, again, resistance from Sikhs saying, hang on, we know what we're doing. We can tell you how to do it better. Was there any kind of backlash from that? I'm just trying to put my head in that particular space and seeing, as someone that's been doing things for so long, and then suddenly the Europeans, was there almost like, well, who are you? We know what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, they had to prove themselves. That's the first thing. So they had to send letters first. People like Allard and, Court, Ventura, Abu Dhabi, all four of them had to prove themselves. So Allard, particularly, he had a letter stating his credentials, saying that he was like, part of certain forces back in France, and therefore he had to have credentials. He had a meeting with Maharaja Ranjit Singh. I've got a really, really great portrait of Allard, meeting Ranjit Singh as well in the book as well.
Have you got it nearby?
Sorry, say again?
You've got it near to you now?
Yeah, let me see if I can pull it out and actually show it to people as well. So, but this is the thing, when we talk about the history and then we're able to actually, pull this information together, the idea is also to back it up where we can with, factual, historical, but also in terms of portraiture as well. So we've got General Allard and Ventura seated in the green, purplish, greenish, sorry, not purple, the coloured material, and Ranjit Singh on the other side. And yeah, so what we have is that, they had to prove themselves essentially as military leaders, and they had to grow their beards, they had to wear the turban, they also had to marry as well. So these are the kind of conditions they had to marry. Yeah, they had to marry. All these conditions had to be met for them to be part of the Sikh Empire. What Maharaja Ranjit Singh was clever. He just didn't want single people turning up and then leaving after, say, 6 months or a year. He wanted to embed them into the Punjab culture and history.
And I guess that also gives them an element of, they have that commitment then as well. They can't just walk when they want to.
Absolutely. So that was very cleverly on the part of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So therefore, the actual the Ferengis, if we can call them that, is actually they were pivotal in the success of the military kind of innovations, because they were able to improve on the artillery, which I've mentioned. They were able to improve on the infantry of the soldiers as well. But then they actually had an elite unit called the Fauj-e-Khas as well. So the Fauj-e-Khas was an elite unit which was trained by all the European generals, and they were considered the elite. So today I actually also did a podcast with Ramblings of a Sikh, and I was actually mentioning there as well that who were the crack commandos. Obviously we had the Nihangs under Khalifullah Singh, but even after he passed away, the Nihangs were crack commandos, but the Fauj-e-Khas were the actual elite Sikh warriors which were trained under the European generals, because they were a complete unit. They had cavalry, they had infantry, and they had artillery, and they could send that unit out and they would be able to do the job. So in terms of the other thing which you said, was there kind of differences between the Sikhs and the Europeans? There was definitely going to be some kind of nafrat, if you can use that word, between the Sikhs, but not to the level as you would expect. I think as their confidence grew, the Sikhs' confidence in them grew as well. And I think that's the really pivotal part of this story. But just to push the boundary even further, because some of them were French, the commands of the actual army were in French as well, which meant you had to now teach French commands to the Sikhs. And that actually happened as well. So they had their military manuals as well, which they brought from places like France and then were translated in Gurmukhi. And then they were actually read out to the Sikh soldiers. But like I said, we had one individual called Sheikh Basawan, who was part of the Fauj-e-Khas. He was told, you will learn these French commands and you don't come out your room until you're finished. And then you need to teach this to the Sikhs as well. So this was the intricacies of where the Khalsa and the whole kind of contribution of this cosmopolitan culture was in the Punjab.
There's a couple of questions rolling on from what you just mentioned there in terms of a response to that question. The whole idea of having to learn another language in terms of, instruction, was that a tactical move? Was that kind of so the enemy didn't understand? Is that right? No?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of two here. The 2 points of factors are the European generals, including Allard, they wanted to bring in French innovations. In a way, they were also trying to stamp away any British innovations, because the French and the English had always had that issue from the Napoleonic Wars, for instance, which was some years before that. But to also put a French stamp in terms of military warfare as opposed to a British stamp. So you got that. Because think about it, if you had British people coming in, which there was some mercenaries from the British who were part of the Sikh Empire, we had the patterns, like I said, the gun patterns which came, but also the French generals, for instance, were able to actually make it their own. So for instance, it goes one step even further. We have the French flag as well, which was actually, raised by the elite units as well.
So when you explain that, it actually comes across like it wasn't just a physical war, it was actually a political war as well to a certain degree.
Absolutely, and that's why the English used to hate the French generals which were being employed, because they were like, okay, look, as Europeans, why are they helping these Sikhs, for instance? And they used to hate it, and they even had a certain route in across the Sutlej which said they will block any foreigner, as in like Europeans, going through British territory to get to the Punjab. That's why mainly all the Europeans actually came from Iran, via Afghanistan and various other routes to get to the Sikh Empire.
Gurinder, we talk about innovation. So does that also include, more developed, better weapons, artillery, etc., as well from the Europeans?
Absolutely. I mean, there was this combination, and I'm going to amalgamate this with another individual from the Sikh court as well. So the idea of the weaponry, so for instance, General Allard imported the breastplates from France, for instance. He imported carbines, which were the guns, from France as well. Because there's this link now between France and England, France and the Punjab as well, through government. So Maharaja Ranjit Singh had a link there with the King of France there. And also, just to add to this, another chapter in the book is to do with Lena Singh Majithia, which I kind of already alluded to earlier on, who was an inventor. So his inventions, which are part of the Sikh court, you have these inventions and military expertise by the Europeans, anything that Maharaja Ranjit Singh could get his hands on, which gave him a military edge, he actually employed within the Sikh Darbar or Sikh forces. The beauty of it was he was able to amalgamate all these different things with absolutely great success. I think that's what we can actually kind of surmise at the end of it all.
Absolutely. And in terms of, fighting skills and, what platforms they use for fighting, was there any development on that? Did Sikhs adopt a particular style of fighting, any particular martial arts? Did the Europeans have any input to that or teach them certain ways of fighting? Because it wasn't just obviously fighting on a physical front in terms of use of guns, cannons, weapons, but physical fighting. Was there any input, any creation of that, between the two?
Well, like I mentioned before, predominantly the Sikhs were cavalry. Now you had an organized way in terms of cavalry, infantry, and artillery, which I've already mentioned, but it's a bit more organized, if that makes sense. So therefore, one unit would go first to fight, then it would be the second unit would be deployed, and then the third. Whereas previously, before, you may have just had a bit of a gung-ho approach in terms of the cavalry just fighting, against another set of forces, for instance. So it became a bit more organized in terms of how they approached battles. In the earlier period, for instance, as an example, there was a siege of Multan, for instance, which wasn't very successful for the Sikh Empire. But later on, after European innovations and the innovations in artillery, they were able to do sieges more effectively as well. So it just shows that rapid kind of change throughout that period as well.
Yeah. And it really shows that the Europeans, with all respect to the Sikhs and those that were associated with it, had their own plan. The Europeans seem to bring in this kind of whole regime of discipline and format and a structure.
Yeah, I think structure is the more important way. Discipline is probably a loaded word, because at the end of the day, if we compare the Misl period with the Sikh Empire period, the Misl period, anything went in terms of actually for survival, if that makes sense. So survival was actually the really, really important for the Sikhs. But then the actual the stability period, so we call the Sikh Empire the period of stability, even though there was all these kind of conquests which Maharaja Ranjit Singh was undertaking, it was still stability in the Punjab, which he actually managed to actually create and was able to give to the people as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think that's evident from what you've been saying in terms of how much influence the Europeans did actually have. And, that's something I've learned today. I didn't realize how important and fundamental and pivotal, they were in terms of, potentially the key to the success of the Sikh soldiers at that particular time. So we touched upon it earlier on, but I do want to kind of go over it again. And before we kind of wrap up, because this is my last question, if anyone wants to join in, please, by all means, pop your questions to the comments, and I'll certainly, go ahead and ask them on your behalf to Gurinder. So again, the Anglo-Sikh maps, you mentioned the importance of in terms of the Sikhs and their positions, but what are the other reasons for their importance? Why must that be shared? Why is it so key to have that information shared with the readers of this book?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we talk about text in itself, you're just reading through the history of it. To actually have maps, just actually pinpoints the kind of positions that the Sikhs were in, where the rivers were, which lands they're referring to. Because again, when I was growing up, the Anglo-Sikh wars didn't really mean anything to me. It was just like some battles between the British and the Sikhs. That was it. Then we kind of drill down, and then we actually find out that the actual lands where the Sikhs fought were sometimes very, very far removed from their initial bases as well. So, like the Second Anglo-Sikh War, it started off in Multan, which is some distance away from Lahore, for instance, and then it kind of moved. When the army moved, then the battle moved almost as well. So it's really pivotal to actually show these places which most people have never visited, for instance, especially in relation to the Second Anglo-Sikh War. The First Anglo-Sikh War, the location, I've visited every single location of the First Anglo-Sikh War, and it's really important to actually, when I went to visit those locations, for me it was, okay, well, I can see, where these positions are, but so therefore collating that information and then making that available through the maps, I thought was something which was just had to be part of the book, essentially.
Yeah. I think it's really, really key to also understand that everything that happened actually, to a certain degree, lay down the, path into Sikh soldiers and their role in both World War One and Two.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big gap between the end of the Anglo-Sikh Wars and World War One and World War Two. But my last chapter talks about this recruitment phase as well, which is about how Sikhs were kind of recruited to become part of the colonial forces, if we can say that. And it's interesting to note that during that period, it's a very extensive period in which the Sikhs were part of the colonial forces. And, people have different views on it. For me, as part of this book, it was just a continuation of Sikh military history. So I didn't view that period as a good or a bad period. I just referred to it as a continuation of Sikh military history in terms of, well, which battles did they fight? Which lands did they go to? I mean, look, we talk about World War One and World War Two. We talk about Sikhs going into France, Italy. But if you go backward 50, 60, 70 years before that, Sikhs were fighting all over the world anyway. They were in campaigns in Africa. They'd got to Malta. They were fighting, across in areas like Burma, the northwest frontier, which, they were already fought at as part of the Sikh Empire, but various other locations even before we get to World War One and World War Two. So I thought it's really important to actually highlight those campaigns as well, because a lot of these campaigns most people would never even have heard of. So I thought it was just important to actually add that aspect for this military kind of text, essentially.
I think we're going to wrap it up there, Gurinder, because I think we've pretty much covered, quite a few, subjects, topics that are covered, of course, in the book, and certain things probably we've kind of digressed as well, but always come back. But that's how we roll. That's how we do things. One question I'm certainly going to ask before we wrap up. You mentioned, and kudos, respect to you, the importance of female Sikhs, within British Sikh history in terms of, military fighting, soldiers, side cord and Sadar cord. So can we expect more focus on them in terms of any future releases from yourself with publications of the importance of women, specifically Sikh women, during these periods?
Yeah, so I'll kind of allude to it slightly. My next work is on the Sikh missiles per se. So what that means is that I will be concentrating a lot more on the 18th century period, if not already within this text. And yeah, absolutely, the stories of the Sikh women within the missals will be also accentuated as well and actually brought to the fore. So we talked about Seb Kaur, for instance. Her role will be actually expanded in terms of Patiala. So Patiala was part of what we call the Fulkian missile, for instance. So her role would actually be expanded. The battles with George Thomas would be expanded. I've already written almost nearly come half a chapter at least of Sahib Kaur and those particular battles, which I haven't covered in this Rise of the Sikh Soldier book. So when we talk about the contribution of Sikh women, it's not necessarily, I think I kind of touched upon it earlier on, it's not necessarily the military side, but also the administrative side as well. So what we find is when the Sikh warriors went out on campaigns, the women had to do were administrators of estates. Even when the missile leaders passed away, eventually the land would, in some cases, go to the Sikh women as well. So they had to keep these lands intact, even though there was other male missile leaders trying to get them from them as well. So it leads to other various stories, but hopefully these are the things which I'll be able to cover in a future publication.
Fantastic. It's good to hear. So I'm going to ask you one final question. I'm going to pass it over to you. Can I wrap up in terms of the Gurinder to make contact and, your other projects? So those viewers that have joined us today and, prior, as we stand at this moment, what do you want to say to them in terms of what can they do to help you and, contribute to the Sabhyachar of Sikhi history, battles and, what can they do to be part of this, movement? I guess that's the best word for it. Because it's always easier for an interview to say, oh, so Gurinder, what's coming up next? And you'll just talk about it and that's it. But I think the people out there, I'm hoping are the ones that are generally those that want to help, want to support, want to contribute and be part of something, that's really pivotal to who we are today as Sikhs that live, in the United Kingdom, but not just that, all over the world. So what would you like them to do which will help your cause and also the team that you work with to achieve what you want to achieve in terms of your objectives?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the basic level is to actually follow us on the social media channels as well. So, I'm on Instagram, on Facebook, but also join up on the Sikh Museum Initiative accounts as well. So the Sikh Museum Initiative is working on various kind of projects. We've always been looking at mapping Sikh relics and artifacts across the UK. We've got a digital museum, which is at www.anglo-sikhmuseum.com. And, we've got various platforms where we can actually, forward the prospect of Sikh history and heritage through lectures. And we advertise a lot of exhibitions that other people are doing as well. We get involved with various other groups as well. So at one level, it's just to be in touch with us through our social media channels. In terms of expertise, if anyone thinks they've got some expertise and they can help us with what we're doing, then by all means get in touch, if that makes sense. And there's always room for more people to be part of this movement, like you said as well. So, I mean, particularly if you're Leicester based as well. I know we're in Leicester because we're always looking for volunteers within Leicester. But that's not to say we're not looking for people across the UK, if not across the world as well. We're in touch with a lot of people across the world who help us on our projects and actually help advertise them as well.
Absolutely. And it's not just about expertise, but it might be just people that just have a general passing interest in it, but maybe to help out. I've been to a few of your exhibitions and, things that you've shared in terms of Sikh history, but just there to be on hand and, support and, do little things that will just help the process.
No, absolutely. And, it's really important that everyone gets involved because, we're getting older as well. And, we're not going to be here forever. And, it's important to impart on the younger generation to see what they can do their bit as well, essentially. So, yeah, very important.
Well, Gurinder, thank you very much for your time. We have kind of gone over by about half an hour, but I'm hoping people, will appreciate that. And it's not been something that has been tiring for them because I've certainly enjoyed myself. And hopefully, you've had the opportunity because I know you've been wanting to really share this for a while, but also talk about future projects. And I think that's key in terms of the success of what you're doing now, but more so, the wider projects and especially, the museum projects and the digital element of it. I mean, that still, that still blows my mind every time I see it. I just find it so wow every time. But fantastic. So well done, Gurinder. And guys, I hope you enjoyed this chat with Gurinder for Punjab 2000 on this platform. Get involved. You know, all the contact details are out there. Gurinder's mentioned obviously the website for himself in terms of the museum initiative. For himself personally, it's www.sikhscholar.co.uk, and he's also got a lot of the sublinks for the other projects that he's involved in.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much to you, Valraj, the Punjab 2000 team, everyone who's been on the actual channels today to actually come and see and hear my vichars and concept. And just a final thought, if you're interested in the book, go to helion.co.uk. That's the publishers, Helion, HELION.co.uk. The book's also available on Amazon as well. So yeah, hopefully it's an insightful and thought-provoking read. And, you know, anyone who's actually read it and wants to give their feedback, I'd be happy to entertain them as well.
What's the price for the book, and are they available in digital formats as well?
The price at the moment, the official price is $21.95, but it has been reduced on various platforms. And in terms of digital, the actual digital versions, they will come out eventually. For this particular book, it will come out eventually as well.
So yeah, as long as we know it's coming out, so obviously, you know, people would like to have things on the go in terms of their phones and, you know, devices. So Gurinder, you know what, it's been an absolute pleasure as always, and you know, I'm sure we'll catch up outside this domain as always. Yeah. Gurinder, yeah, thanks for your time, and thank you very much for everyone that's still listening. You know, I really appreciated it, and you know, I'm sure, you know, Gurinder will always, you know, value that, because he, you know, that's just the way he is, and he wants to share the knowledge, and you know, hopefully you guys will also appreciate it just as you know, just as much as I have. Thank you very much, guys. You take care.
Okay, thank you. Sat Sri Akal.
Sat Sri Akal.